war of the Vietnamese people against the American imperialist invaders. After the resounding victory at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the Geneva Accords on ending the war and restoring peace in Indochina were signed. According to the agreement, the warring parties agreed to a ceasefire, French troops would withdraw from Vietnam, and the North would be completely liberated. An important provision of the agreement was that a general election would be held after 2 years to unify the country. However, the United States, with its ambition to dominate Vietnam, quickly intervened and pushed France out of the political game in Indochina. Taking advantage of the transitional situation, the US entered the South, established a puppet government, and organized an army of collaborators to carry out its long-term plot to divide the country. By providing abundant economic and military aid, the US gradually turned South Vietnam into a new-style colony, directly intervening in and manipulating all aspects of political, military, and social life there. The organization of a general election under the Geneva Accords was deliberately sabotaged by the US and the Saigon government, shattering hopes of peaceful reunification. In the face of the blatant invasion plot and actions of the American imperialists, the entire Vietnamese nation once again rose up, entering a new resistance war to defend national independence and reunify the country. That struggle was a heroic continuation of history, demonstrating the unyielding spirit and aspiration for freedom of the Vietnamese people. The resistance war went through 5 strategic phases. Phase 1, July 1954 to December 1960, the period of preserving forces and transitioning to partial uprisings, the Dong Quai movement. The North focused on consolidation and construction along socialist lines to become a solid revolutionary base for the whole country. The South moved from political struggle to a combination of political and armed struggle and partial uprisings, defeating the US unilateral war effort. Implementing the Geneva Accords, the Vietnamese armed forces regrouped to the north. Meanwhile, the puppet troops withdrew to the south. With the plot to permanently divide Vietnam, turning South Vietnam into a new-style colony and a US military base, starting in 1955, the US built for the Ngo Dinh Diem regime a core force of artillery and armored troops along with 54,000 local soldiers under direct control of the US. Through nearly 700 military advisors. The US and the Ngo Dinh Diem government it had installed made every effort to sabotage the 1954 Geneva Accords on Vietnam, implementing the policy of denouncing communists, killing communists, launching frenzied attacks, killing and imprisoning more than 500,000 cadres, party members, and patriotic people, brutally suppressing the people's struggle, demanding the implementation of the Geneva Accords and the holding of free general elections to unify the country under a democratic, civil government. In just 4 years, 1955 to 1958, 9 out of 10 cadres and party members were arrested, killed, or imprisoned. Many districts no longer had any party infrastructure. The revolution in the South suffered heavy losses and fell into a very dangerous situation. Faced with the frenzied terrorism of the US Diem regime, in the early days we had no specific measures to counter the enemy's one-sided war. Gradually, party members and revolutionary masses realized they had to take up arms against the enemy, or the revolution would be destroyed. Following the policy of political struggle combined with armed self-defense, the Southern people gradually restored and developed armed teams, stepped up armed propaganda, eliminated traitors, dismantled enemy-controlled administrative structures, organized small ambushes, resisted enemy raids, and protected bases. In many places, people recovered weapons that had been hidden during the regrouping, forming propaganda and self-defense armed units. From 1957, armed activities increased in coordination with political struggle. Some revolutionary armed units launched attacks and ambushes against the enemy, protecting their bases. In 1958, the movement developed further with an attack on Do Ting district capital, 70 kilometers from Saigon, heavily damaging 2 enemy battalions, killing 200 troops and taking control of the district capital. An assault on the headquarters of the US Military Assistance Advisory Group in Bien Hoa killed many Americans. Building upon and developing the resolutions of the Central Committee, the Politburo, the Southern Regional Committee, and the outline of the Southern Revolution by General Lê Duẩn. In January 1959, the 15th plenum of the Central Committee of the party determined the fundamental path for the Vietnamese Revolution in the South was an uprising to seize power for the people. According to the specific situation and the current needs of the revolution, that path was to rely on the strength of the masses, with the political force of the people as the primary basis, combined with armed force to overthrow the ruling power of imperialists and feudalists, and to establish a revolutionary people's government. The conference also predicted that, since the US imperialists were the most belligerent, the people's uprising might develop into a protracted war between us and the enemy. Immediately after the conference, the Party Central Committee and the government of Vietnam established the Truong Son Military Transport Group, Group 559, beginning the support of personnel and weapons for the South. Resolution 15 of the Communist Party met the urgent needs of the Southern Revolution and paved the way for its advance. Under the light of the resolution of the 15th Central Committee Conference, January 1959, in 1959 to 1960, successive partial uprisings broke out in the Central Highlands and the Southern Delta, returning power to the people in thousands of villages and hamlets, pushing the enemy into a passive and crisis-ridden state. In late 1959 and early 1960, a Dong Khai general uprising movement rose up to eliminate tyrannical local officials, dismantle grassroots governments, and attack outposts. The breaking of the enemy's oppressive control broke out widely across the southern provinces and the mountainous areas of central Vietnam, with the people seizing power. Notably, in the attack on Tua Hai at dawn on January 21, 1960, the Vietnamese armed forces eliminated 500 enemy troops, captured and re-educated another 500, and seized thousands of weapons. This was one of the first major annihilation battles by the armed forces of the South. The Dong Khai movement marked a breakthrough development of the Southern Revolution, shifting from maintaining and preserving forces to launching offensives, from primarily political struggle, supported by armed forces, to a combination of political and military struggle, and from military struggle gradually rising to be on par with political struggle. From the People's Uprising, the revolutionary armed forces in the South rapidly developed. The National Front for the Liberation of South Vietnam was established November 20, 1960. From the north, strategic supply routes to the south by land and sea were formed and expanded. The Southern Revolution moved from a defensive to an offensive posture. Phase 2, January 1961, June 1965. The Southern Revolution developed from partial uprisings into a revolutionary war, defeating the US Special War strategy. The success of the Dong Khai movement thwarted Eisenhower's one-sided war, plunging the Ngo Dinh Diem regime into a prolonged crisis. Facing the collapse of its puppet regime, the US responded with the Special War strategy, working to strengthen and expand the Saigon Army, increase aid, deploy advisors and support forces, launching sweeping operations, relocating civilians, and building strategic hamlets under the Stanley Taylor Plan. The Kennedy administration introduced a new military doctrine, the Special War strategy, and chose South Vietnam as the testing ground. The core content of the Special War was to consolidate the puppet regime, enhance the combat capabilities of the puppet army through US command, weapon supplies, and technical support, intensify sabotage against the north, prevent infiltration from the south, pacify and concentrate the population into strategic hamlets to drain the water to catch the fish, aiming to isolate and ultimately eliminate the Southern Revolution. The puppet regime, puppet army, and strategic hamlets were considered the backbone of the Special War. Under the momentum of victory, the Southern Revolution continued to intensify both armed and political struggles, gradually elevating armed struggle to the same level as political struggle, seizing and maintaining the initiative, building up forces in all aspects, consolidating and expanding revolutionary bases, breaking the pacification program of the US Diem regime, and pushing the revolution to a new stage. On February 16, 1962, the National Front for the Liberation of South Vietnam was established, inspiring and encouraging the Southern people to enter a new phase of the revolution. The Southern Revolution developed from partial uprisings into a revolutionary war, combining armed and political struggles, attacking the enemy with a three-pronged offensive on three strategic regions, intensifying guerrilla warfare to wear down and destroy the enemy, defeating the helicopter and armored tactics of the US and the Saigon Army, and supporting the people in resisting sweeps and dismantling strategic hamlets. In 1962, the armed forces and people of the South combined political and military struggle to defeat numerous US Diem military sweeps and forced relocations into strategic hamlets. In many battles, revolutionary forces attacked enemy bases and eliminated hundreds of troops. The US Diem 18-month pacification program failed. In January 1963, at the Battle of Ap Bac, January 2, 1963, the enemy deployed 2,000 troops supported by aircraft, warships and artillery, coordinated by 51 US advisors using modern helicopter and armored tactics to sweep Ap Bac. The Vietnamese force, consisting of only one reinforced battalion, just 1/10 the size of the US force, defeated the US troops and killed 450 enemy soldiers. Though not large in scale, the victory at Ap Bac was a significant signal of the impending failure of the special war strategy. With increasing support from the North, the People's Liberation Armed Forces of South Vietnam grew stronger, moving from guerrilla warfare to concentrated operations, launching major offensives aimed at destroying key components of the puppet army. The Binh Ga Campaign, December 2, 1964, January 3, 1965, was the first campaign that coordinated main forces from the South, regional main forces, and local armed units to attack the enemy, eliminating more than 1,700 enemy troops. The Ba Jia Campaign, May 28, July 20, 1965, wiped out over 2,000 enemy troops, shot down 18 aircraft, and supported the uprising of people in 29 communes across 6 districts of Quang Ngai Province to take control. The Dong Xoai Campaign, May 10th to July 22nd, 1965, annihilated many battalions and regiments of the Saigon Army, killed nearly 4,500 enemy troops, shot down 34 aircraft, and contributed, along with the political struggle and uprisings of the people, to defeating the US Special War strategy. These major military victories demonstrated the maturity of the revolutionary armed forces in the South, showing their capability to completely defeat the puppet army, even with US command and support. By mid-1965, the US-backed Special War strategy collapsed. In the North, on August 4, 1964, the US staged the Gulf of Tonkin incident, falsely announcing that US warships had been attacked by the Vietnamese Navy in international waters off the Gulf of Tonkin. Using this pretext, on August 5, 1964, the US launched an aerial and naval bombing campaign against the North. When the US carried out the Tonkin Gulf incident, August 1964, and bombed certain areas, the Vietnamese military and people repelled the attacks from the very first battle and resolutely responded to subsequent US air raids from February 1965 onward. Phase 3, July 1965 to December 1968, developing the strategic offensive posture, defeating the US limited war strategy in the South and the first phase of the air and naval war against the North. February 7, 1965, November 1, 1968. The global strategy of flexible response proposed by President Kennedy introduced 3 types of warfare: special warfare, limited warfare, and total war. After the failure of the special war strategy, the US passively shifted to conducting the limited war strategy in an attempt to quickly end the conflict. This limited war was a new form of colonialist aggression that involved deploying a limited number of American troops, along with US-dependent Allied forces and puppet troops, where American forces played the principal combat role on the battlefield. The objective of the limited war strategy in South Vietnam was to quickly achieve military superiority and firepower, to search and destroy our main forces, regain the initiative on the battlefield, expand and consolidate controlled areas, and win back the people. At the same time, the US launched an air and naval war against North Vietnam to prevent support from the North, sabotage its reconstruction, and shake the Vietnamese people's resolve to liberate the South. From mid-1965, the US rapidly deployed combat troops to the South, from 84,300 to 536,000 by the end of 1968, peaking at 542,000. These were supported by 57,800 Allied troops, peaking at 70,300, and the Saigon Puppet Army, 650,000 troops, peaking at nearly 1 million, forming two strategic forces equipped with the most modern military technologies, excluding nuclear weapons. The US launched two large dry-season strategic counter-offensives in 1965 and 1966, and 1966 to 1967, aimed at destroying the leadership of the resistance and a portion of the Liberation Army's main forces. That's a strong continuation of the third phase of the war and provides vivid detail about how Vietnamese forces transitioned to a more assertive offensive posture. Here's an edited and slightly refined version of your text to improve flow and clarity while preserving its historical depth and tone. Despite the escalation of US military involvement, the armed and political struggle in the South not only held firm but advanced steadily, with the Southern people more determined than ever to fight and defeat the American invaders. Following the opening engagement against US forces at Nguyen Thanh, the Battle of Van Tuong, Binh Sơn, Quang Ngai, in August 1965 became a landmark victory. Vietnamese forces pushed back a major US offensive, eliminating 900 American troops and proving that the Revolutionary Army was fully capable of defeating modern US forces on the battlefield. This victory energized a widespread movement across the South with the slogan, "Search for Americans to fight, search for puppets to destroy." Building on these early victories, Nguyen Thanh, May 26, 1965, Van Tuong, August 18 to 19, 1965, Dut Quoc, November 8, 1965, the revolutionary forces launched a series of large-scale offensive and counter-offensive operations, each dealing significant blows to US and puppet troops. Notable campaigns included Plei Mai Campaign, October 19, November 26, 1965, Bao Bang Do Ting Campaign, November 12 to 27, 1965, Tai Sơn Tink Campaign, February 20th, April 20th, 1966, Sathay Campaign, October 18 to December 6, 1966. The campaign to defeat Operation Junction City, February 22nd to April 15, 1967. Sto A Campaign, November 3 to 22nd, 1967. These operations not only wore down enemy morale, but also exposed the shortcomings of US military strategy in Vietnam. In total, over the course of the two dry-season counteroffensives, 1965 to 1966 and 1966 to 1967, US and puppet forces conducted over 1,000 major and minor operations aimed at reclaiming liberated zones. Their largest operation, Junction City, intended to destroy the headquarters of the South Vietnamese Revolution, ended in failure. Across the South, Vietnamese forces eliminated over 150,000 enemy troops, including 68,200 American soldiers. Political struggle also surged, particularly in urban centers under US control, where underground revolutionary organizations mobilized the masses to protest, strike, and oppose the regime, further destabilizing the puppet government. The failure of the limited war strategy opened a new strategic opportunity. On the night of January 30th and into the early morning of January 31st, 1968, Vietnamese revolutionary forces launched the General Offensive and Uprising, the Tet Offensive of Mo Thanh. This surprise assault struck at the heart of US and puppet military and political infrastructure. 4 major cities, 37 provincial capitals, and hundreds of district towns across the South came under attack. Despite fierce resistance, the offensive inflicted heavy casualties, shattered the illusion of US control, and triggered a deep psychological and political crisis within both the American military and public opinion at home. At the same time, in the Northwest, the Route 9 Khe Sanh campaign, January 20th to July 15th, 1968, unfolded. Vietnamese forces laid siege to the heavily fortified US Marine base at Khe Sanh, stretching from Cur Viet to the Laos border. The prolonged battle pinned down American forces, forced massive US reinforcements, and contributed to the overall success of the Tet Offensive by diverting US attention and resources. The combined impact of the Tet Offensive and the Khe Sanh Campaign marked a decisive turning point in the resistance war against the United States. The myth of US invincibility was shattered, and the idea of a quick American victory was proven impossible. Domestically, US public support for the war plummeted, and political pressure mounted for de-escalation. The war had entered a new phase, one increasingly favorable to the Vietnamese people's struggle for liberation and reunification. Would you like to continue with Phase 4? The people and army of North Vietnam were determined to both defeat the United States and ensure production and daily life, while actively supporting the South. By the end of 1968, they had shot down and destroyed 3,234 aircraft, killed or captured thousands of American pilots, and sunk or damaged 143 US and puppet naval and commando vessels, defeating the first phase of the American air and naval war of destruction against the North. After suffering heavy defeats in Vietnam and facing a rising wave of anti-war protest both globally and within the United States, the US government was forced on November 1, 1968, to declare a halt to the bombing of North Vietnam and to sit down at the negotiating table at the Paris Peace Talks 1968 to 1973. The limited war strategy was ultimately a failure. Phase 4, January 1969 to January 1973. Defeating the Vietnamization strategy and the second phase of the US air war, April 6, 1972, January 15, 1973, forcing the US to sign the 1973 Paris Agreement on Vietnam and withdraw all American troops. After the collapse of the limited war strategy, President Nixon shifted to implementing the Vietnamization of the war strategy. This strategy focused on rapidly expanding and modernizing the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN, so it could gradually replace US forces as they withdrew from the country. At the same time, the US intensified pacification efforts in South Vietnam and expanded the war across the entire Indochina peninsula. After the coup that overthrew Prince Sihanouk's government, see the Lon Nol Sirik Matak coup, March 18, 1970, the United States and the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN, launched an invasion of Cambodia in an attempt to cut off Vietnam's strategic north-south supply corridor. In response, the Liberation Army of South Vietnam, in coordination with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Cambodia, launched counter-offensive campaigns and defeated major enemy attacks. See the Northeastern Cambodia campaigns, April 29 to June 30, 1970, and February 4, May 31, 1971, and the Route 6 campaign, October 27, December 4, 1971, expanding the revolutionary base of Cambodian forces to cover 5 provinces. In early 1971, the ARVN, backed by American firepower and supported by the right-wing Laotian military, launched Operation Lam Son 719 along Route 9 in southern Laos. The goal was to sever the strategic north-south supply corridor and divide the 3 Indochinese countries. The Liberation Army of South Vietnam, together with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Laos, launched a counter-offensive campaign and decisively defeated the enemy's operation. Seizing the initiative from March 1972, Vietnam launched a major strategic offensive against the enemy's defensive network on 3 fronts, which included the following campaigns: the Tri Thien Campaign, March 30th to June 27th, 1972, the Northern Central Highlands Campaign, March 30th to June 5th, 1972, and the Nguyen Huy Campaign, April 1st, 1972, January 19th, 1973. Following these, comprehensive offensive operations were carried out to disrupt pacification efforts in Region 5 and Region 8. See the Northern Binh Dinh Campaign, April 9th, May 3rd, 1972, and the Mekong Delta Campaign, June 10, September 10, 1972. In coordination with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Laos, Vietnam also launched an offensive campaign to liberate the Plain of Jars and defeated American counterattacks and territorial incursions. Faced with the severe defeat of the ARVN, the United States resumed intense aerial and naval attacks in the south and initiated the second phase of its air war against North Vietnam. The US launched a strategic air raid using B-52 bombers on Hanoi and Haiphong at the end of December 1972, but it was decisively repelled in what became known as the Dien Bien Phu in the air. This forced the United States to sign the Paris Peace Accords on Vietnam, January 27, 1973, agreeing to withdraw all US and Allied troops from South Vietnam and to respect Vietnam's independence, sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. The Vietnamization of the war strategy was ultimately a failure. Phase 5, December 1973, April 30, 1975. Creating strategic advantage and launching the general offensive and uprising in spring 1975, completely liberating the South and concluding the victorious resistance war against the United States. Although the US withdrew its troops, it left behind 20,000 military advisors disguised as civilians, along with weapons, military equipment, and continued military aid to the Nguyen Van Thieu regime. The puppet army reached 1.1 million troops, and made every effort to violate and sabotage the Paris Agreement. The people and armed forces of the South resolutely defeated the enemy's territorial encroachment campaigns, while the entire country urgently built up strength and momentum to move forward with the complete liberation of the South. With US support, the Saigon regime intensified its sabotage of the Paris Agreement and continuously launched sweeping operations and territorial encroachment campaigns. Our forces and people defeated the enemy's invasions, rapidly built up strength, and expanded liberated zones. The victory of the Duong 14 Phuc Long campaign laid the foundation for the Politburo's conference held at the end of 1974 and the beginning of 1975, where it approved the strategic plan for the liberation of the South, 1975 to 1976. The Politburo decided to seize the strategic opportunity and launch the general offensive and uprising in the spring of 1975 with 3 major strategic offensives. First Strike Thanh Nguyen Campaign, March 4 to 24, 1975. From the end of 1974, Vietnamese forces secretly positioned themselves for the Thanh Nguyen Campaign, selecting Buôn Ma Thuột as the key battle to initiate the offensive. On March 4th, Vietnamese troops attacked and severed highways 19 and 21, cutting Thanh Nguyen off from the coastal region of Military Zone Vai. On March 9th, they seized Duc Lup Nui Lur, fully isolating Buôn Ma Thuột. The campaign began with the Battle of Buôn Ma Thuột, March 10 to 11th, 1975. On March 10th, 4 Vietnamese divisions attacked Buôn Ma Thuột. After 2 days of fierce fighting, they annihilated all enemy forces there and took control of the town. Enemy reinforcements sent to counterattack were completely destroyed. Understanding the enemy's intention to retreat from Thanh Nguyen, Vietnamese forces set up ambushes, pursued and annihilated retreating units, ultimately causing the collapse of the enemy's Second Corps, Military Region 2, and liberating all of Thanh Nguyen and the south-central provinces. Second Strike, Tri Thien Hue Campaign, March 5-26, 1975, and Da Nang Campaign, March 28 to 29, 1975, along with uprisings by the people and armed forces in Military Zone 5, led to the liberation of the provinces of Quang Tri, Thua Thien, Quang Nam, Quang Tin, Quang Ngai, and the cities of Hue and Da Nang, eliminating the enemy's First Corps, Military Region 1. As the enemy withdrew from Thanh Nguyen, on March 21st, Vietnamese troops launched deep assaults encircling Hue. On March 26, they destroyed enemy units, liberating the city of Hue and all of Thua Thien province. They then advanced to Da Nang, where they coordinated with mass uprisings. On the March 29th, Da Nang was completely liberated. Third Strike, Ho Chi Minh Campaign, April 26 to 30th, 1975. On April 14, 1975, the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Vietnam decided to launch a final offensive against Saigon, with the aim of completely liberating the South. This operation was named the Ho Chi Minh Campaign. After breaking through and crushing the outer defensive ring of Saigon Gia Dinh, on April 26th, 5 columns of Vietnamese troops advanced into Saigon. On the morning of April 30th, they penetrated deep into the city, capturing key targets in the inner city. At 10:45 a.m. on April 30th, Vietnamese tanks entered the Independence Palace, and the puppet president Dung Van Minh declared unconditional surrender. Combined with the People's Uprising, Vietnamese forces annihilated and disintegrated the enemy's 3rd Corps, Military Region 3, liberated Saigon Gia Dinh, and forced the Saigon regime to surrender unconditionally. The Ho Chi Minh campaign was a complete success. At the same time, offensives and uprisings continued to eliminate, capture and dismantle the entire 4th Corps, Military Region 4 of the enemy, liberating the Mekong Delta provinces and the islands occupied by the Saigon Army, thereby concluding the resistance war against the United States in complete victory. The resistance war against the United States ended in total triumph. The Vietnamese people defeated the most large-scale, prolonged and brutal neo-colonial war of aggression since World War II. It was also the most devastating military defeat in the 200-year history of the United States. In its invasion of Vietnam, the US went through 5 presidents, mobilized 6 million troops, spent $352 billion, dropped 7,850,000 tons of bombs, and used tens of millions of liters of defoliants. It employed the most modern weapons and technology, except for nuclear weapons, yet still suffered an unprecedented defeat in its history. The resistance war against the United States for national salvation successfully concluded Vietnam's more than 100-year-long national liberation struggle, opening a new era in the country's history, complete national independence and reunification, advancing towards socialism. At the same time, it created favorable conditions for the revolutions in Laos and Cambodia to achieve decisive victories and contributed significantly to the global people's struggle for peace, national independence, democracy, and social progress.